Hello, Bible readers. Today is the birthday in our deep dive into Genesis. The long-awaited son of the promise is finally born. It is, as Brueggemann calls it, the resolution of all the anguish. And yet this narrative is peculiarly understated. One could almost miss the point the way this story is told. Except for the mention of old age, this account does not even acknowledge that there's been a problem. The fulfillment seems strangely anticlimactic after the troubled anticipation that's been going on for quite some time. Oddly detached is this story from what's gone on before. But that in no way diminishes the crucial character of this text. I don't know what the top 10 missed opportunities of the Bible might be, but this has to be one of them. Like a poet or a more dramatic writer could have come up with a narrative more worthy of the moment than this birth story of Isaac. I'm not going to say I could have done better, but, maybe. A couple days ago, we considered the chapter where Abraham takes on circumcision as a sign of being a participant in a covenant with God. And I talked about how faith in God cannot simply remain abstract or without an action, that faith is both idea and behavior. Well, this birth story holds together the Word of God and the actual birth of a child. The whole story and what it means depends on that coupling. Brueggemann says you cannot separate the eternal purpose of God and the concrete biological reality of what happens here. If we let go of one or the other of them, then, if all we have is the eternal purposes of God, then we keep God safely spiritual, safely distant, safely theoretical. And this happens in our own day, right? But if we don't hold on to any of that, then faith becomes only secular, only what we can see, only what we can do. So faith requires both a trust in an unseen promise and an understanding that God does things rooted in those promises. So that's a crucial point in this birth story, which means, of course, faith remains a radical response. It bears witness to the peculiar power of God to evoke new life by grace. That's the superpower of, or a superpower of God, you could say, is that God evokes new life by grace, not by what is deserved or what is reasonable, but by grace. The birth of Isaac is a miracle. And miracle is a hard word to define. So Brueggemann says, a miracle is not the violation of a natural order. It's the concrete assertion that God is faithful to God's promises. A concrete assertion that God is faithful to God's promises. Whenever the someday, someway promises are brought into this world in a concrete way, into the here and now, that is a miracle. Each time a miracle happens, God reminds us that we're not confined by barrenness or any other form of death or emptiness. Instead, we're only bound by the freedom of God's love, which is much bigger than anything we can imagine. That is why Sarah laughs. The joyous laughter is the end of sorrow and weeping and being closed in by barrenness and smallness. Laughter is a biblical way of receiving a newness which cannot be explained, a miracle. Barrenness has now become a joke. It can now be laughed at because there is full joy. I could say more about Abimelech and Ishmael. Abimelech models a faith that lacks here in Abraham, the father of faith. So that's kind of ironic. It's actually a pretty amazing story. The discussion between Abimelech and God, it's like a lawsuit where Abimelech is accused, but then found innocent. Abraham's the one who lied, but in God's freedom, Abraham is still the one who is preferred. The point, again, is that for Abraham to continue as God's guy, That's not based, obviously, on Abraham's virtue. Instead, it's based on God's promise. That's always the case. Whether it's going to be Abraham or Isaac or Jacob or Israel itself, never is the chosen or preferred one chosen or preferred because of their virtue, but because of God's promise. We're going to see that again and again and again. As for Ishmael, God cares for Ishmael. No stigma gets attached to Ishmael. All are agreed on the preciousness of Ishmael. God, the angel, Hagar, Abraham, but not Sarah. Ishmael has rights and they are honored. Isaac evokes full joy, and he is the one that is celebrated. It's almost like the prodigal son story in the Gospel of Luke, where Ishmael is like the older son, and then Isaac is the one that gets celebrated. There's a tension between this Ishmael and Isaac story that the story does not force us to cut by choosing which son should I prefer as a reader, which son should I dismiss or wish away. Instead, as Brueggemann says, really the way it plays out is God will remember all the children like a mother remembers all her children. Next time we're going to dive into Genesis 22. The one who brought so much joy is to be sacrificed. I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.